Welcome, 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 everyone. It is me, Nina Sachs from Yoga Awakening Africa, and I am excited to be chatting with Johann. Johann, how are you doing? All good. Good to see you. It's been a while.
Thank you. Thank you, Nina. Nice to be here. Yeah, lovely to talk with you.
Yeah, I know. I think like our yoga paths crossed. It must have been like around 2008, somewhere around there when I started Yoga Awakening Africa and I was doing the magazine, and you were still out in Stellenbosch, and you'd already been teaching yoga for many, many years by then. And now things have changed. I'm out in Mozambique, you're out in Muizenberg, but the yoga is still happening. It is still growing and evolving with you and where you've been at. I mean, you've been, in the yoga industry now for 3 decades, like in the early 90s, you started teaching?
Yeah, I started in 1990. Yeah.
Okay, amazing, hey?
So that's going on 35 years. Yeah.
35 years. It's and you hear people saying, oh, I've been practicing yoga for 20, 30 years, but a lot of people haven't actually really been teaching for more than 5, maybe 10 years. So someone who's been there and doing it for 35 years is quite a feat. What I wanted to bring up with that, not that numbers are important by any stretch of, by any means in a sense, but like this idea that like yoga is just this timeless practice. Like it is there, it is part of us. Once it's got a hold of you, it tends to linger around. And kind of like how, with like this timelessness of yoga, we're also seeing that, like we were chatting beforehand, like there's this cutting edge space in like the whole yoga environment and business and world, and like how yoga has shifted and changed and evolved quite drastically, like in those 35 years. So I thought, like, maybe even like, what are some of the biggest shifts or changes you've noticed with yoga? I think that might be quite interesting, from like the 90s to like today. Okay, granted, like we've got like things like Zoom and online, which weren't around then. But like with with yoga, what are like the big factors that you've picked up?
Yeah, that's possibly like quite a tough question. So it goes back so far. If I think of 1990 to 2025, which we're almost at. One of the major changes I still think was a landmark change. It was around about 2000 when Yoga Alliance came about, and the yoga scene changed quite radically from a fairly traditional method to a very Americanized model, with a central logo and a posturing which I thought was imposted of this is the international qualification, this is the real deal, and so on and so on. Very formatted system. And while it did have a lot of benefits, it also, for me personally, but this is a personal opinion, it also annihilated or changed, not for the better, a lot of the traditions. So that was a big change, and fortunately things come and go, and over the years we've also seen a return to individual yoga and non-yoga alliance yoga, and a lot of after say 10 years, young older teachers came forward and said, we're not going with that, and we want to put forward our own models or styles, or whatever the case is. And whether that's for commercial or individual or egotistical reasons or not, it's not so important. But yeah, the important thing is there's a lot more yoga and a lot more variety. What's also changed is I've recently looked on the internet, which is where we look for our information, and saw that a lot of the older teachers, so my age bracket, 50 or older, and even older, are saying that I wouldn't say that they're saying they're feeling threatened, but they're noticing that a lot of people are rapidly drifting into very different aspects of yoga and styles and ways of doing yoga.
Mhm.
And you see there are a lot of really powerful younger people and teachers out there, and a lot of the old slow yoga has seemed to be all but disappeared in many ways, which I wouldn't worry about because things exist and comes and goes and so on and so on. But at the same time, there definitely seems to be a shift from what other people are saying, that people in Ashtanga are saying that they're losing students. Some people are saying they're losing a lot of students because people want a quicker fix. And they want to go to a teacher that says, hey, if you do this, it'll be amazing, and you'll just become a vegan, have certain food, and do this practice, and then you'll just be like awesome. And people, a lot of people are saying with so much confidence that it's astonishing. It's like you got to admire it. And yeah, it can work, or aspects of this, but I don't find myself ever as a traditionalist saying traditional things and like being old-fashioned or something, unless I was old-fashioned and a traditionalist when I was 25 when I started.
I think that was you when we met. I think you were very much not in that realm. So it's really interesting to hear you say this. And I'm just going to pick up kind of like what you were saying, which is really interesting when you're saying like in the 2000s when Yoga Alliance became so, big, and you found that that was a big shift in the movement of yoga. And like, like I run the yoga teacher training with Jennifer and Pramila. And we'd been pushing and resisting to not get accredited with any alliance because we just, from that yoga alliance, so to speak, we didn't believe that there was any value in what they were doing and showing. And with that said, we've literally now just accredited with like the International African Association, International Yoga, what's it called? Yoga Alliance International Africa. There we go. Because we kept having potential students, clients coming to us and saying, well, are you registered? Are you recognized with anyone? And at the amount of times I try to explain to them how like yoga is not a recognized, industry and it doesn't matter. They just wanted to see that little logo somewhere. And at some stage, like we were chatting, like this timelessness and this cutting edge of yoga, like, do we now kind of like say, okay, we find an alliance that we kind of agree with and we like their work, or do we, push back and say no? And like you're saying, everyone is up to their, has their individual opinions and can choose what to do 100%. But what I thought of, like when you're saying that, I was like, at the academy, Jennifer teaches like integral hatha yoga, which is the slow, like an hour, a class is like an hour and a quarter at least. And it's not this like, jumping back and forth. And it's not the, the Instagrammable yoga. It's really going deep, and it's including different layers of pranayama. It's including your mantras. It's getting into the philosophy. It's having a conversation with yourself. And I think that's probably one of the reasons subconsciously maybe why we kind of like keep pushing a little, because we feel like Ananda Kutia doesn't offer the teacher training anymore. I mean, you were saying like that was one of the places that, had the essence of yoga, and, Jennifer and me, we all trained through them. And we kind of like feel like we're the only ones still carrying on with that. And it's quite sad because we thought like, well, if we stop doing this, who else is going to offer the style of yoga around? Anyway, so that was kind of like my little side on with regards to you and the Yoga Alliance, because it is a big thing. And I do feel that it did shift the face of yoga quite a bit, and has impacted what people see and feel of yoga. Anyway, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's
And maybe also share your story on Ananda Kutia, like, having gone there and what you feel?
If I could approach possibly from a maybe a very different not point of view, but a different angle or entry point, is if I look back at the Nanda system, for example, which was the Sivananda system, which was the Divine Life Society. So we studied, I only went to Nanda, I think 93 or something, to 97, that most of the 90s. And I remember when I got there, there was a whole wall of the gurus, pictures of the gurus. And then we were told that we were going to get certified. And I still have my certification up here in my wall. I can see it from here on my wall. And it says, Johann has satisfactorily completed an understanding of the yoga system and the philosophy of yoga and the teaching of yoga. It's not about 200 hours or 3,000 years or anything like that. And it's not about the certification at all. It's about the traditional verbal, what is the word for it? It's like the lineage that gets passed on in a transmission type of style. And in all the great traditions, from business to music, art, etc., there's always been that system that has always been hailed. And today we have various systems called mentorship systems, where the ultimate qualification is sitting with a master, and now you have on the internet master classes with, and so on and so on. And those, for me, that even that masterclass with can go wrong if the person that does the masterclass, if I do a masterclass with my favorite music composer or something, that certainly doesn't turn me into a master after having done the masterclass. And so the world doesn't now have 50,000 master film composers or something like that because they've done the course with the famous guy. The famous guy did his proverbial 10,000 hours and learned the hardest possible way. And he can give you 1,000 master classes in 1,000 hours, and that's not going to make you a master. So for me, there's something intrinsically wrong with any teaching course or yoga or anything like that. That it doesn't say. I'm not saying don't offer a master class. I'm just saying don't say that that's a substitute for reading a Krishnamacharya book and studying a course where it said that Krishnamacharya learned this system from his teacher, and he was initiated in this kind of yoga, and he initiated others into this kind of yoga, and for his lifelong he taught the system, and this is a system that we are learning. That is the system, and there can't be a substitute for that. So for me, I think it's not so much about, it's okay for me if somebody comes up and says, I'm just going to use that same example, I'm not being political. If somebody comes up, I'm a vegan, and I've just done my yoga course and I really love this stuff, and I'm like, I'm amped, and I have this Instagram and I have that, and I think that's great. But there has to be some wisdom where I remember at our course, we were told expressly, hey guys, this doesn't mean you can now go out and claim like you're like the best yoga teacher on the planet, because you're not, you're just qualified. So if that's spoken or said, then that puts everything in perspective. But if we drop all those traditions, and as I say, I'm not a traditionalist, but if we drop the traditions, for me, a traditionalist is somebody that just like wants to keep things in a certain, box.
Contained way.
But if we don't keep the values, then we just lose. It's not just about following a certain structure. It's also about what are the core values of the structure, or how's it integrated, that kind of thing. What's the integration of it? So yeah, I think that would be my answer. So I'm sure the world comes and goes into embracing and letting go of those kind of values, and we see it now already. And as you said, like after, in the first 10 years, yoga looked in a certain way, and in 10 years it looked different. 10 years, it's different again. And then you start, the longer you live, the more you can see, the more you can observe patterns and add value to, for example, timelessness or virtue of having a guru or a teacher that can teach the real values, for example.
And so kind of like, I think that's a really important point that you bring there. Is kind of, again, you're chatting about the timelessness and then finding that teacher who can teach that. And I know that you were saying, before when we were chatting, you're also thinking of, offering a teacher training, but actually what's more important and what you've been working with is mentoring students and having that one-on-one time. And I find that is, that's pretty much going like down the lineage of Krishnamacharya Desikachar. Desikachar literally, when he was in his early ages, like that's just how he was doing it. It was like yoga was a personalized practice for each person, individual, because my life and how I'm living and all the stresses that are happening to me or with me are very different to what you're facing, and my needs and your needs and personalities and doshas and constitution are so different. And so what's going to balance me is going to be different for what's going to balance you. And I think that's where the personalization and the mentorship and the one-on-one with yoga is so useful. And I know you're a strong believer in this, is that like, if you understand yourself and what you're needing, then you can share with others from there. Do you agree with me?
Yeah. Yes, that is how I understand the system as well. Is that that there's this tremendous, if I can use that word, respect for the other individual, and at the same time, the understanding that we're in an environment, a shared environment, for example, and we have a community aspect, and we have the differences, and part of the healing, going in the direction of yoga as a healing practice to become whole. It can mean so many different things in so many different ways for so many different needs as well. People are ill or struggling in different ways with health or mental illness, etc. And society struggles with massive mental illnesses. And if you're looking at a society of massive illnesses, mentally especially, well, can't even say especially, including the environment and diet, etc., and systems. The systems are like rotten to the core. We could really very easily say an ultimate thing such as the world and its systems, specifically the systems, are rotten to its core because it's not holistic. It doesn't have place for the individual. And oddly enough, that gives rise to, obviously, a lot of alternative people looking at the holistic. But then, oddly enough, a lot of people just simply going with a system that's so broken in the first place and looking at a broken system to fix with more broken tools. Because it's just so broken. And and then you look at the yoga system, and it's still there, it's alive, and it just depends where you look. And that's the beauty and also the difficulty with the internet. If you didn't know, if I look at my Instagram account, then I see a whole bunch of Krishnamacharya info. But if you've never heard of that name, you're not going to find this yoga. You're going to find all the other kinds of yogas because however the algorithms work. So it depends where we look.
We'll open up like what we find. Yeah, exactly. And so I know like another big part of you, because when I was years ago started recording my Yoga Nidra little recordings for my students and things like that, you were the guy to go to, because like you were into the music and you got me beautiful background music for the Yoga Nidra stuff, and you did intros when I was doing the podcasts and things like that. So music is a massive part of your life. How are you now using music and mantra in your personal practice? And then from there, I've got another question.
Yeah, that's part of the integrated question, or line of questioning or conversation we're actually following, is that I do feel that much of it's not an uncommon method is to personalize one's practice or interest in whatever we're interested in. The idea isn't to turn out robotic yoga teachers. One of the weirdest things I heard from, I didn't study Bikram, and I've done some Bikram classes at some point when it was popular, and I actually really liked it as well. But it was about what I would bring to the Bikram, and I looked around me and I went like, yes, I'm not. You can't be serious, Like about, it's like I couldn't actually believe my eyes when I went to classes. What was going on there? But fascinating stuff. And anyway, but the point being that it's about finding your own individuation, like becoming who you really are, and that means that the yoga, at one point, you become, I would say, almost. Your yoga becomes very personalized and individual, and then at some point it becomes classic again. You start to realize you added a whole bunch of your own stuff, and it's actually not necessary. That's why there is a certain setup. But then yoga, in its wisdom, and our teachers in their wisdom said, "Hey, you got to invent it yourself. You got to like learn the hard way, or the long way, or the interesting way, or whatever that way is." And yeah, if we keep going around those circles, but not in a loopy kind of a way where we're just looping around the same thing and there's no inquiry around it, but it actually spirals up. Yeah, then you'll see there's nothing new under the sun, that kind of thing. And yeah, so as a wannabe musician, long ago, like you're trying to be like certain things, and like you sort of find your feet, and in the COVID time, I at that stage haven't been playing guitars or doing any real like acoustic music for like 10, 15 years or something. And we were forced to stay at home, and I was teaching online, and I could entertain myself up to a point, but then I just suddenly went, hey, take your guitar out. And then I was really, like you said, doing yoga meditation music. But I always wanted to do something in terms of something I could do with a voice and an instrument, something simple and acoustic and live and so on. So I taught myself a couple of mantras. But the same thing, what I described, it's like you have to find your own voice and your own way and style of doing it. If you're this kind of person, and the kind of person that can just listen to music or watch another yoga teacher, and then 5 minutes later they've made a copy of it. You get people like that. For me, to really connect into the soul of something, it's totally a different process. And again, that's the classic process. It's said in the music traditions, in the same as yoga, you study with a master. So a lot of the great cello players were prodigies. They were young and they were fantastic, but they became really amazing in later years after having studied for many years with a well-known or not a well-known teacher, and a lot of hours. And that classic idea that to do something simple but really well, it's a Zen thing. It's the hardest thing that you can possibly do. And even though a mantra may be 3 syllables or 3 lines or 1 chord or something like that, to do it long enough, because there's an aspect to it that we can't explain. There's a presence in the mantra that's more than just saying the words. I mean, to this day, practicing or doing the Om in the yoga class, it's like a hit and miss thing. Some days I have a certain note or sound, and then all the students are in tune, and it sounds awesome. And the next day, some of the students are out, and I can't find my sound, and it sounds kind of like bloody awful. And I'm like, what just happened, you know? And it's like, some days I just want to laugh, and sometimes I'm like, kind of think I'm never going to do the sound again.
Mm.
And everyone's feeling their way into it, you know. So
And I
yeah,
think that's also the beauty of like what you're speaking to and what you're saying. It's like it's not always going to be consistent. It's not going to always be the same. And that's like the thing with yoga. It's always evolving. It's always changing. It's always being like where you're at, reflecting back where you're at or what you're needing.
yes, and I want to, yeah, exactly. But it's also about inspiration and being led by example, which is also what you're supposed to do as a yoga teacher, is to lead by example.
Mm.
Um, and then finding a current or a flow there, because we can't always be the best example, or we probably won't be. But since we're saying Ananda Couture a lot in this conversation, not so long ago, I was at a meeting there, I think. I don't know what it was, some kind of a gathering, I mean, when there was a yoga class being finished. And as the class started to finish, it's that thing when you get to a yoga place and you can feel there's a yoga class. So the interesting thing is about that the power of Om, and even using such a word, but I would say the life force of Om, how powerful it is. And then for me, that inspires and explains the beauty and the practicality of yoga, and the integrity of yoga, and so much the techniques of yoga. And as much as these sounds and mantras and aspects are felt and can be intuitive and so on, there's also the practice again, the practice making it more of that what you want to feel and experience. And it's not always like that with one's yoga practice or teaching or music or performance. And musicians will say that, and there's a different perception. And sometimes people will say, "Hey, there was such a lovely class," and I'm like, "Well, I could hardly stay awake through the class." So you go like, "Thank you, thank you. I'm glad that you enjoyed it." And the other day, like I would think like, "Wow, that was like my best yoga class ever." And somebody goes like, "Hey, Johann, are you okay? You look you're looking a little bit tired or something." I'm like, "Yeah, no, it's all good." And it's all those kind of perceptions. But yeah, so my music, I've started to find, for me, so that's one level of the mantras and so practices. But what I found not surprising was that, so one of the first mantras I did on the guitar, and I'm trying to arrange it so that there is sound. Otherwise, why would you have accompaniment? But there's a whole art of if you put too much into it, then it becomes about your performance. And it's okay if it's about your performance and you sing beautifully. If you're David Pramal and you've got like a whole band and everything, people come to listen to it, that has its function. I wouldn't never be the purist that says that's incorrect, it shouldn't be like this, or it shouldn't be amplified.
Mm.
It becomes very like, I don't know, like argumentative as well. But when I talk about purity, there's definitely intention, etc., 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 involved as well. So the intention, essentially, or the soul of the practice is what matters. And of course, I was interested in sound production. Is it good? Does it work? Does it serve its purpose, etc., etc.? But anyway, to get to the point is, so I started to explore all the ways that I could do this one particular mantra. And I find what actually works best if I just go like, because it's this kind of inner thing. But of course, that's not going to really cut it even in a yoga class, because if I'm going to go like people can go, what. But if you project the sound, people go like, oh, that's so beautiful, then maybe that doesn't serve a certain purpose of, it's like not me wanting to do something beautiful. Maybe it is. Different questions as well, ways of thinking. But the important essence of it is, I found that the more I said the 2 or 3 mantras that I was just working with, that the more these mantras started to transform me. There's a certain interpretation to each mantra or the Om or whatever it is that we chant.
Mm.
Then after a certain amount of time, you go, wow, something's shifting here. Something's changed for me. And so the mantra, that Vajra mantra is the one that I'm actually talking about, where I recently was given a book on a Buddhist interpretation of it. It's a Buddhist mantra, Sanskrit, but Buddhist Sanskrit. And it's one of the explanations, or my version of many of the explanations, is by the light of God, we are enlightened, for example. And then the last phrase, so hum, in it, is also interpreted as the Buddha field, the field, or what Lynn McTaggart would call just the field, the energy field. So the amazing thing is when you say that mantra over and over for the 2 years of COVID every morning for 10 minutes, or sometimes I would play for 2 hours because I have the time and I just want to feel the mantra. After 2 years, it's not like your fortunes have shifted in the sense of there's a visible difference, perhaps there is, perhaps there isn't. But there's this real sense of, wow, like I've gone through a certain veil. There's a certain veil that's lifted. And I could only ascribe that to practicing these mantras.
Mm.
And then,
Also, like a little bit of like perception has shifted on how you perceive or understand the world. Yeah,
because like the yoga teacher or the what do you call it, self-help guru or the priest or some whatever person would say, God is light, and then like, right, I'll think about that, or I like that, or whatever the case. Or you go like, yeah, I feel that, whatever the case is. But then only through the practice, which is your traditional yoga again, only through the practice of the practices that will let you feel this light in a physiological way, which raises the question, isn't it just a physical sense of light, or is it actually God, for example? Then only through these practices and saying the mantras, then you'll suddenly go like, I'm starting to feel the light of God here. Mm. And then you realize, hey, the light of God is actually mantra, or the practice of mantra. So in that mantra where it says guru, and guru being God, not, like the guy with white clothes. And then by the light of that God, the lotus flower blooms. And you go like, we don't even have lotus flowers really in Cape Town, but flowers bloom, and it's actually the flowering of consciousness. And then, I read that Eckhart Tolle book one day, like, I don't know, like 30 years ago or something. Like that entire Eckhart Tolle book, talking about the flowering of consciousness and so on, and the power of oneness, can be contained in these kind of mantras. Mm. And after a while, you understand, I read the thick book, but you can condense it in one mantra. But for some reason, both works better, because if you only have the mantra and no explanation, you're going to experience a whole bunch of energy changes, but you're going to have no idea what's actually happened. Mm. And that's that whole thing of yoga again, knowledge, logic, pranayama, mantra, asana, relaxation, year after year, year after year. Your one teacher may pass and you find another teacher. You may have been teaching in this place. And I always said, I've taught in every possible place in Stellenbosch when I was living there, because I taught there for 21 years. So anything that had a roof over it or a tree or something, I taught there. And then after that, you start to understand yoga teaching. Mm. Mm. No, so even Krishnamacharya only understood yoga teaching the way that he did it when he was 104 years old.
Didn't realize he turned 104. Didn't realize he made 104.
Yeah, he made 100. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. So Johann, I know that like we've touched on like a load of different things, from like the timelessness of yoga to like nowadays, to kind of like alliances, to mantra, to music, to we tapped on Nanda Kutia. We went everywhere in this conversation, which is lovely, and it's all kind of like tied together. But for those yoga teachers who've been teaching for a while and have maybe, been, in the industry like us, like what kind of like words of advice would you have for them who are feeling a little bit despondent at the moment with maybe their class size, maybe like, what the future of yoga is looking like? Like what kind of, what would your thoughts be? What would your advice be to them going forwards?
Sure. A lot of the mantras and ideas and phrases and so on, they're fairly easy to follow. They're like breadcrumbs in the tradition, and on the internet or in bookshelves or in mantras. If we're looking at the timeless world of yoga, it's around us everywhere. And in terms of books, for example, and I'm not saying to read the book, but just to have a copy of that Iyengar book, The Light on Yoga, and to understand that that the light of yoga is always there. Yoga is a state of mind and a state of body mind specifically, and if we can only grasp or follow the most simple practices of in breath and exhale, and becoming or having that awareness, and then knowing that the timelessness of that is really the essence of yoga. So we always have to ask ourselves, what is the essence of anything? What's the essence of beauty, or what's the essence of practicality, or what is my essence? And one of the leading people, as in persona or characters or beings, probably the better word being, Maharishi Ramana, who was early century Indian, 20th century.
Okay.
His whole one of self-inquiry, who am I, is important. And the practice of yoga is important. So just staying with the practice, like all my students and all the people that I've been training into doing or becoming yoga practitioners, or following this method of yoga, even if when they've had other ways of teaching yoga as well, has always been to just always have a practice. The only way you're going to get through your life of challenges, and including your life of wanting to attain more of the self-realization is through practice. Not even practice makes perfect or anything like that, but just practice. And then that must have its core value. I think that's essential. Yeah, and not define the practice. It's got to be regular and consistent.
Yeah.
Never give up on that practice.
Yeah.
And if you are the teacher person, like if that's your archetype, and if that's what it's about, then teach, like practice and teach, practice and teach. And if your archetype isn't to teach, you still got to have the practice. Your archetype may be you're a vision quester. You want to know things, but you're going to know nothing. You're never going to contextualize your intellect if you don't have a yoga practice. It's a very ultimate thing to say, but it's really like that. And from my perspective as well, for music or art, you're never really going to reach your potential or essence. It's a yoga teaching. I'm not making it up. If you don't have a yoga practice. Yoga is a state or a condition or a situation even, or a frequency. And if you don't have a practice to attain that, then you don't have it, and then everything else isn't yoga. And
I think that, I think that you bring up like an important factor as well, because I think so many people fall in love with yoga and, they start practicing it and then, they want to do maybe like a teacher training or they want to go and teach and then they realize that maybe they're not actually that teaching archetype. So they're doing something, but they're not actually a teacher. And like you're saying, if you may be the visionary, like you still need whoever you are, whatever your archetype is that having that your own personal practice is so important because that'll help you understand kind of like your dharma, your purpose in life and where you need to go.
Yeah,
Then it
the
won't be
path.
like you forcing and pushing against something that you think should be happening, but actually isn't. So that was very, very enlightening and just a really nice reminder. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's another way of putting it, which is, I think, a great way to conclude it as well, is our conversation is that there's always holistic or holism or everything or beautifully said in yoga or everything, all that is. And then in the whole yoga philosophy, which is indispensable to yoga, and so these are also, again, one of the things I remember from the traditional yoga training is that when we throw away the duality and non-duality, understanding that, then you're actually throwing everything away. It's like then happening. So the first criticism that I think we've all had when yoga became commercial wasn't the fact that it was commercial and now a lot of people are doing, but the fact that much of that commercialization threw away the need to acknowledge that there's duality and non-duality. So yoga says if you're throwing that away, it's not yoga. And then you're calling it yoga, and it's like actually wrong here. And so I went through a whole period of wanting to call that art, and then made me quite unhappy as well, or it makes you angry or frustrated or something. You could go, just remember the practice of yoga. You go practice yoga, and just do what you do.
Yeah.
So that understanding that everything that's not holistic isn't holistic, and in reality, everything is holistic. In other words, the ecosystem of the earth and everything on it is meant to be holistic, and if it's not, it's broken. And then there's that essence of the whole that you as a practitioner, the moment that you practice, you're holistic, if you practice holistically.
Yes.
So the solution is always that holistic looking at yourself, your practice. And that's it. That's a short and sweet version of it.
I love it, Johann. Thank you so much for chatting with me. I really, really appreciate it. I'll put all your details in our show notes below. So if someone wants to contact you or catch up with you or be mentored by you or catch some yoga with you in Muizenberg or catch you out on the surf, then they'll know how to find you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That's a lot of fun to talk to you.